I'm going to start just by having each of you introduce yourselves to our viewers and tell us a little bit about what your organization does. Faisal.
My name is Faisal Saleh. I'm the founder and the executive director of the Palestine Museum US. I am a Palestinian. My family is from a village called Selma outside of Jaffa, and they were refugees in 1948 and lost everything. I was born in the West Bank. I grew up there. I came to the US to study in 1969, and I stayed since. And I started the museum in 2018 with the mission of telling the Palestinian story to a global audience through the arts.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Shelly.
Hi, I'm Shelly Altman. I'm a co-founder and member of the leadership team of the New Haven chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace is the largest progressive anti-Zionist Jewish organization in the world. Jewish Voice for Peace, we work for collective liberation for all, but especially focused on the Palestinian struggle for freedom. And we advocate at Jewish Voice for Peace for liberation and justice and equity for all peoples.
Thank you so much. I want to just say thank you both for the work that you do. You both work for and represent organizations that just do really important work, really impactful work. Can you tell me a bit about what your organization believes, or how your organization has been approaching the recent attacks in Gaza, but overall the full year of Israel's campaign in Gaza? Faisal, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, to start with, the museum is not really politically oriented. However, the scale of what's going on in Gaza and the nature of it makes it very difficult not to get involved politically. And really our role here is to use art to show what Palestinians in Gaza are going through and what they're experiencing, and to illustrate the agony of the people there, but also the hopes for the future.
On that note, I'll turn to you, Shelly, to tell us about Jewish Voice for Peace.
Yeah, so everything that we do is really driven from three of our core values. The first is accountability to our Palestinian partners. We are a Jewish organization in a Palestinian-led movement, and so accountability to Palestinians is critical. We also have commitment to our Jewish communities. And the third value is commitment to racial justice, racial equity, and as Faisal mentioned, Palestinians tend to be dehumanized in the Western world. We can get into more of that later. But all of our work in Jewish Voice for Peace, and also here in New Haven, behind it all has been attacking the dehumanization. Sometimes it's education, cultural events, but in this time, with Gaza being devastated in a genocide by Israel, Jewish Voice for Peace has been focused on stopping harming Israel. And so we have had, and I'm sure you've heard in the press, many events. Some of them were loud and noisy and taking over Grand Central Station to draw attention to this. Some of them are quiet. Some of them are working in coalition with our partners in New Haven, such as the Connecticut Palestine Solidarity Coalition. And so that's really the focus of our work in what we're trying to accomplish. Until we stop arming Israel and, of course, have a ceasefire, there's really nothing to be done.
So I think this is really the reason we're here, to talk about the escalation since October 7th. But we do know that these issues predate October 7th, even though we get stuck on that date for some reason, right? Can you both help our viewers understand a little bit of the history? Talk to us about how we got here.
Well, I'll start. In the late 1800s, a movement was created by Theodor Herzl called Zionism. And the idea behind Zionism was to gather up Jewish people from around the world and bring them to Palestine and create a national home for Jews in Palestine. So that movement started slowly, picked up steam, and was supported by a lot of the financial tycoons of the time, and also by some of the Western governments. The United States was one of the sympathizers, so was some European countries. This movement picked up steam after World War I, when Britain was giving control of Palestine under a mandate. And the mandate that Britain received is to prepare Palestine for independence. Obviously, they didn't do a thing like that. So Britain was sympathetic to the idea of Zionism and issued what's called the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which basically said that Her Majesty, or His Majesty at the time, I guess, looks favorably on the idea of creating a Jewish home in Palestine, provided it does not interfere with the civil rights of the population. But they didn't say political rights, they said civil rights. In other words, it's okay with them if Palestinians can be just servants, right, and have no political rights whatsoever. After that, things got worse. Britain allowed large-scale immigration to come into Palestine, and the Jewish immigration from Europe accelerated during and after the Holocaust that took place in Germany. And the newcomers were creating an infrastructure that was not blended with the existing country. And they were training and building militias, heavily armed militias, and coordinated and trained, and they were supported by Western countries. In 1948, Britain decided to leave and left the Palestinians to fend for themselves against the Zionist forces. The Zionist forces, over a period of 14 months, depopulated 500 Palestinian villages and towns, bulldozed most of them, and changed their names and pretended there was no such thing as Palestine. And 800,000 Palestinians became refugees, living in over 40 or 50 refugee camps in the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And that situation continues till today. So it did not start on October 7th. It started in 1948 at least.
One thing I would add to that, thank you, Faisal, is that a lot of the descendants, a lot of the people who live in Gaza, it might even be a majority of the people who live in Gaza, their ancestors lived in the villages just on the Israeli side of the boundary between Gaza and Israel. So, it just adds more weight to the anguish over people coming from Gaza and what happened on October 7th. It's another thing to be aware of in how fraught that situation is.
And as we talk about really those boundaries, the borders, when you look at the boundaries that have been drawn over the decades and how occupied Palestine, those boundaries get smaller and smaller over the years, there's this ongoing argument that Israel has a right to defend itself, and somehow defense tends to lend itself more and more into the boundaries that were drawn yesterday are now here and now here. Can you talk to me about Israel's right to defend itself?
Yeah, if you're living on stolen property, you have no right to defend yourself, even. Not that Israel is defending itself. No one in their right mind can describe what Israel is doing now as defending itself. I mean, they're going through a total extermination of the people, destroying the infrastructure, destroying all the institutions, all the hospitals, all the schools, all the banks, all the every form of life being destroyed. And that is not really defending themselves. What the Palestinians did on October 7th was, at that point, what was going on, and Israel and the United States were conspiring with the Arab countries at liquidating the Palestinian issue completely and totally erasing the Palestinians from existence. What Hamas did, they came out of the ground and they attacked the Israeli army and they killed 600 Israeli soldiers in fighting, in a fair fight. The Israeli civilians who were killed, the majority of them were killed by Israeli military forces because they did not want to allow civilians to be taken as hostages. You may have heard things to the contrary, but there have been reliable sources from within Israel that verifies what I just said.
Shelly, do you have anything to add to that articulation of the situation on October 7th?
No, I think I'm good with it.
I want to add something.
Let me add one thing, which is this: Israel defending itself. Separate from the devastation, the genocidal devastation that Israel has brought to Gaza and is now bringing, by the way, to the West Bank and to Lebanon and Israel is a heavily militarized power, funded to a large degree by the greatest military force in the world, the United States. And so to call that what they are doing, even if they hadn't gone as far as they had in Gaza, to call that defense, it makes no sense at all. It's not defense. It's really a continuation of the 76 years now of trying to eliminate Palestinians from the land bit by bit, because if you make life unbearable, people will leave. They'll move themselves out. You won't have to force them out. They're leaving. So I'd add that.
I want to add another thing. Palestinians don't recognize the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't believe that Israel is a legitimate state. And their presence in Palestine was by force and was against all kinds of laws. And the Palestinians are determined to go back to their homeland that was stolen from them in broad daylight.
I want to stay on something you said just a moment ago. You said the Palestinian issue. That phrase sticks with me because it is reminiscent of this term from the 40s when Germans would refer to the situation at hand as the Jewish question. And you might recall this story. It was, well, what do we do of the Jewish question? I would like to say that I think that history classes of tomorrow will teach this moment as a tragic irony. But I'm interested in knowing what the two of you think about the parallels that we're seeing when we see the organic parallels of language that organically arises, the Palestinian issue, the Jewish question. What do you think about that?
Shelly, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Well, first, from a personal perspective, I have a lot of friends whose grandparents are Holocaust survivors. Fortunately, I am not a survivor I'm not a descendant of Holocaust survivors, but I am a descendant. One of my parents and all of my grandparents left Russia in the early 20th century because of the persecution that they were suffering through the pogroms and other, anti-Semitism in general. And so for me, as a descendant of people who fled from that kind of treatment at the hands of oppressors, to see the oppression being done in the name of Judaism, whether it's not directly the Holocaust, but it's still a Jewish question. It's still a Jewish question because now this is being done in the name of Judaism, and it's a co-optation of Judaism. It's not what we're seeing has absolutely nothing to do with the Jewish religion. It has to do with military powers and racism, and you won't find anything in the scriptures about what Israel is doing to Gaza.
I mean, I understand that in the scripture it says you shouldn't kill and you shouldn't steal. And Israel has been doing a lot of killing and stealing. I mean, you've seen the Israeli soldiers in the homes in Gaza that they were demolished, going into people's bedrooms and houses and cracking their safes and taking money out of the safes, opening women's drawers and taking their underwear and parading it on their faces on social media and things like that. Things that are totally disgusting, from a human perspective. The Israelis have shown the world who they are for real. For a long time, it was supposed to be the most moral army in the world. Israel is the only democracy. The Israelis are nice people and all this. What it turned out to be, the Israeli army is the least moral army in the world. Israel is a democracy if you're Jewish, and if you're not Jewish, it's the last place on earth you want to be. We mean that. So Israel is the Zionist state of Israel is a racist state that goes beyond what South Africa was. And it's a state that kills people on a daily basis. And people say Netanyahu is doing this. It's not Netanyahu doing this. There's a huge percentage of the Israeli population supports what's going on now. In fact, there's a significant percentage that says that the army hasn't killed enough Palestinians yet. They haven't killed enough children. They need to kill more.
I am really disturbed about a lot of the rhetoric that I'm seeing from young people. And so one thing that is a bit concerning is how this movement or this devastation feels really defended by young people. But I want to stay on this topic of Zionism and Judaism and the way that those two things interact, and anti-Semitism, because I don't want it to be lost in the conversation that we continue to hear rhetoric that there's a rise of anti-Semitism. And I think, for the last year, if anyone speaks out against the Israeli government, having this conversation even, right, would be deemed as an anti-Semitic act to a great deal of people. Shelly, would you be able to give us a little insight into that?
Before he does that, may I just interject?
Sure.
Israel makes a very strong connection and link between Zionism and Judaism. Mm-hmm. It's not the Palestinians' fault that Israel is doing that. It's implicating the Jewish people with their crimes.
I'm going to dive into that exact thing.
And as Palestinians, we recognize that, and we still distinguish between Zionism and Judaism. But Israel makes all their effort to confuse the two and make Zionism and Judaism be the same thing. And this way, any effort to fight Zionism and racism can be described as anti-Semitic, because the way Israeli narrative represent that to the world is as being, you're against Israel, you're against Jews, and you're anti-Semitic. So yeah.
It's okay. Thanks, Faisal. So just picking up on one thing you said about the young people in Israel being supportive of this, I think what we're seeing is how deep trauma can go. Because in Israel, there are also young folks who are joining Breaking the Silence, who are former Israeli soldiers who went through the trauma and saw what they were part of. And the other part of the trauma I would bring to the United States, which is when you see all the lawn signs saying "We stand with Israel." To me, it feels, and to me as a Jew, being in neighborhoods where I live in neighborhoods where those lawn signs are there, and I'm feeling for my neighbors how traumatized they are from Jewish history in the last 100 years that they are willing to not only, to support this in spite of what we're all seeing. It's so traumatic, and that's sort of, I just wanted to get that in relation to supporting this. As far as anti-Semitism, at Jewish Voice for Peace, we feel that we need to focus on all forms of hate. There is anti-Semitism in this country, and especially at this point in time, anti-Semitism, anti-Arab racism, anti-Palestinianism, anti-Black racism, and if we don't treat those all as something that we need to acknowledge and deal with, then we're not coming up with a solution to these problems. And the charges of anti-Semitism is being weaponized. There is absolutely anti-Semitism in this world. There is some anti-Semitism on campuses, but the students who are in the encampments who are being called anti-Semitic, a large number of them are Jews. And calling them anti-Semitic and then shutting them down and censoring them for advocating for treating Palestinians as real human beings and subjecting them to suspension from school. And this is happening in Connecticut right now. I know of people who are in Connecticut college campuses who are being considered for suspension because they participated in the encampments last April. And to be doing that to Jewish students for having had what they, for being strong enough and clear enough to stand for Palestinian liberation is atrocious. And one other thing I would say is that I think anti-Semitism, as much as it exists in this country, is not systemic right now. It's episodic. And I think anti-Palestinian racism is systemic. There are many states have passed laws.
35.
35 states incorporating the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism into their laws, so that businesses can be blackballed, individuals can be blackballed from doing, from various activities with the government. And also, as I said, you see campuses using the IHRA to censor students and kick them out of school. So I think we need to deal with both of those, anti-Semitism and the anti-Palestinian racism, but we need to do with one systemically and stop bring that into the legal system. And with anti-Semitism, when we encounter it, we have to name it and fight it and use it as a means of educating the people who are doing anti-Semitic acts about what they're doing. I think it's an opportunity. It's a bad opportunity, but it's an opportunity to deal with it and to diminish it.
I want to come back to a point Faisal made a moment ago. And I've been grappling with this one as well, particularly because I grew up here in New Haven, the very large Jewish community, have been to my number of bar and bat mitzvahs. I actually spent time in Israel and toured the West Bank, a trip that was funded by the Jewish Federation. And I remember specifically in my time in the West Bank as they were teaching us the history of Israel, saying to the representatives with the Jewish Federation that you would be hard pressed to find a Black person who isn't at least empathetic to the plight of Palestinians. And me personally, as someone who has so much affinity for absolutely my Jewish friends and the culture that I have been able to absorb over the years, I struggle with this idea when folks tell me that it is anti-Semitic to call out Israel. It is anti-Semitic to say this is a genocide. For me, I think that undermines, you use the word weaponized. I think it sets Judaism up for a great deal of anti-Semitism. If what we hear is opposing oppression is anti-Semitic, what do you say to that?
You said it better than I could ever say it, but thank you. I often want to say when I hear what I and my colleagues at JVP and our comrades, all over Connecticut, when we get called anti-Semitic, especially me as a Jew, I feel like it's anti-Semitic to be calling me anti-Semitic because it's denying my Judaism. Mm. And one really important thing about the New Haven Jewish community is that we have an organization called the Mending Minyan, yep, which is a Jewish Havarah. A Havarah is an informal collection of Jews who don't do Jewish ritual in a synagogue with the American flag and an Israeli flag. We do our Judaism as we feel like doing it, and it's Judaism separated from Zionism, and Israel has nothing to do with it. What has to do with it is Jewish tradition, Jewish ritual, and love, and Jewish love for Jews. Mm. And so that we have had some acceptance of Mending Minyan, but very little acceptance of it from the institutional Jewish organizations in New Haven. We have had meetings with Mayor Elliker about this and told Mayor Elliker that we expected him to recognize our Jewish community the same way he does other Jewish communities in New Haven. And mixed results. And so yeah, to get back to what you were saying, Mercy, I think that I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know if it's coming from trauma. I don't know if it's coming from racism, anti-Palestinian racism. It's not an accusation. It's a question I have in my head. Where is this coming from? Mm. How can you demonize people for advocating for people's rights?
Is Israel above reproach?
No state is above reproach. It's pretty simple answer to it.
I think a lot of people right now will think about the trauma that led to the erecting of the state of Israel and say, well, this is the natural result of a state under threat.
I think we have to meet people where they are. And I think I would say that if Israel is still, if the people in Israel, even though they're generations later, are still having trauma from the Holocaust, we have to meet them there. Can't deny it. But it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to allow a state to weaponize the trauma, if you will, or it's not so much weaponization, it's more acting out the trauma, if that's what it is, to do what they're doing.
One of the ways that Israel tries to make their job easy of what they're doing is they use the mainstream media to demonize Palestinians and make them look like terrorists and dehumanize them to the point where killing Palestinians becomes less consequential and they can do it without a problem. Let me give you an example of how the mainstream media uses that. There was some sort of a story, I'm not sure which network was doing, could have been CNN, whatever. They were interviewing Israeli soldiers who came back from the fighting in Gaza, who were traumatized. And the reporter was being so sympathetic to them because they can't sleep, because they drove their tanks and armored vehicles over so many Palestinians and killed them. And they can't sleep because they keep reliving the thing of them being run over and killed. And all the reporter was talking about is the trauma that these soldiers are having. Well, what about the people who got killed under the tanks, for God's sake? They don't count. They're Palestinians. We're not concerned about them. Let them die. So this is what the mainstream media has been doing. All they are concerned about is 100 hostages that are being held there. And mind you, none of them are receiving the kind of treatment Palestinians receive. Just today, there were photographs, video of Israelis, jeeps, military jeeps, leading trucks with open back, full of Palestinian people blindfolded and stripped to their underwear, sitting in the back of trucks on the way to concentration camps in Israel for interrogation and torture. And those are actual videos that you can watch. It was on Instagram today. They're fresh from yesterday. And Israel is rounding up all the men in northern Gaza and shipping them to concentration camps, basically. And then they're making the women walk out of there towards southern Gaza, which eventually they're going to try to do the same thing there. And the media is nowhere to be there. Once in a while, a CNN reporter will break free and does a little story about something. But the rest of the media is absent, and the media has disqualified themselves and disgraced themselves from being a trusted source of information for some people. And the people now are relying on social media to get their stories, to get their information, and information that they can rely on. They cannot rely on the mainstream media.
There's a story from the Holocaust that is so similar to the story you just outlined. German soldiers report back to German generals saying, we can't do this hard work. We can't do this hard work of shooting Jewish person after Jewish person and forcing their bodies over this cliff. And so the general, it gets back up to the higher ups, and leaders send down a psychologist to observe what's happening. He says, I will sit through no less than 100 killings. I'll sit through no less than 100 killings to just see what's going on. He sits through 100 killings. Jewish person is lined up in front of a cliff, shot, and body falls to its eventual arrival place at the bottom of this cliff. He came back and he eventually says, these young men can't do this anymore. They're drinking to cope. They're depressed. They're smoking to cope. They're not coherent. We have to find a more efficient way to deal with the Jewish question. And effectively, that was a turning point for the war, and that's when concentration camps were put aside. And I think about the analog to the moment that we're here now, because it is that moment of, we think about the person inflicting the harm and not the people experiencing it. There isn't a question there. I just wanted to share that for the parallel, but if either of you wanted to respond.
My only response is how talking about these two situations in the same breath will be criticized as being not respectful of what happened in the Holocaust. I would expect that to happen, and it's another indication of dehumanization of what's going on in Palestine, that would even be subject to criticism, because it's a very profound observation that you made.
Thank you.
I mentioned that we did a special program to honor the artist who was killed recently. And a few months ago on her Facebook, she posted a photo of hers and says, and this photo, so that you guys won't have to spend a lot of time looking for a photo when I die. And in another post, she said, I just don't want to be in a bag where nobody can tell my arm from my leg when it is.
What's the definition?
Her family all survived except her. And her sister posted an answer to that. And she said, don't worry, you're whole.
Thank you for sharing that. That is the
It's on
devastation we're
Facebook
seeing.
if you want to see it. It's in Arabic though, but the post is there.
That's okay, don't much away out of
Yeah,
here.
I mean, it's it just, these anecdotal things, they're so heartbreaking, these things you see.
When all of this devastation is blamed on one day in history, October 7th, 2023, I am left to ask a question about Hamas. And Faisal, I would love for you to tackle this.
Sure.
Simply put, who to a Palestinian person, or what to a Palestinian person, is Hamas?
Hamas is the Palestinian IDF. It's the armed forces of the Palestinian people. It's a legitimate organization whose mission is to defend Palestinians and defend Palestine. And what happened on October 7th, Israel had been laying a siege to Gaza. It's a siege on land and in the sea, and preventing anything that goes into Gaza without Israel approving it. So for 16 years, the people in Gaza have been living at the mercy of Israel, deciding who can go in, who can go out, and how many calories each person is allowed to eat. And not letting important things, not letting people to go out and receive medical treatments and in a very inhuman way. So the Palestinians had the legitimate right to go out and break that blockade by any means possible. Think if somebody comes and blockades New York City, the US would use nuclear weapons to demolish them. Yemen is blockading preventing Israeli shipping to go through the Red Sea. And look what Britain and the US have been doing. They've been bombing the Yemen every few days. They didn't wait 16 years to bomb them. The Palestinians were patient. The civilians who were killed either was incidental or they were killed by Israel, by Israeli gunships. Palestinians were trying to capture the civilians. They had no interest in killing them. They wanted them alive. So the story about Palestinian raping and killing is a lie, total lies, and has been proven. Whatever the New York Times wrote was all lies. And Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, had even verified that. So again, it's the mainstream media that's trying to make the Palestinians look bad. The Hamas is an organization that has, whatever it did or does not rise to the level of criminality that the Israeli army in Israel has been engaged in. Doesn't even come close to anything like that.
Let's stay there for a second. And Shelly, I want to take this to you. Mm-hmm. Faisal said that Hamas is the Palestinian IDF or IOF. Considering the scale of each organization, would you agree with that statement?
In terms of a role, yeah, Hamas it's the only military that Palestinians have. There is no military in the West Bank. No. And I don't have the information that Faisal has about what happened in 48, which is what we like to call Israel. Once they broke through the wall, I think breaking through the wall, they should have broken through that wall years ago. And they had the Great March of Return 2 or 3 years ago. And what happened there was that the Israeli snipers stood there and shot out with weapons, Ruger rifles that are manufactured by a company whose headquarters are right here in Connecticut. And so, you know, the need to break out of that wall, it was just like building and building and building. You know, what happened once the wall was broken? I don't really know what to believe about what happened there. What I do know is that breaking that wall was necessary. And while I'm on that subject, Connecticut is, just as our country is complicit to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars in what's going on now. Stern Ruger rifles are made by a company whose headquarters are here in Southport, Connecticut. Colt Firearms manufactures rifles which have been distributed to settlers in the settlements in the West Bank, which are being used to kill Palestinians in the West Bank. And the third and maybe perhaps most egregious one is that Pratt and Whitney in Middletown, Connecticut, makes the jet engines that are being used in the planes that are dropping bombs on Gaza. So, and the fourth data point on that is that Governor Lamont took a trip to Israel back in 2022, 2 years ago, and came back saying, we're in heaven with Israel. I'm not, paraphrasing. We're going to bring over all this Israeli industry, the defense industry, the tech, but he was focused on defense. And one of his aides who was traveling with him said, Connecticut and Israel are joined at the hip. So I think we in Connecticut have to be aware that this is what our leadership thinks and this is what our businesses are doing.
So Hamas is to the Palestinian what IDF might be to an Israeli person. But I think one thing that we have come to know, or have always realized perhaps, is Israel is backed by the largest economy in the world. Israel is funded by the largest army in the world. Hamas isn't. Being in Israel, being familiar with the Iron Dome, the defenses, we are really familiar in the West with Israel's ability to defend itself, and do not at any point realize that Israel's defending itself against countries and a people who do not have by any means the same means to do the same.
They don't have resources like Israel does. They take the bombs that Israel drops that don't explode, and they take them apart and remanufacture weapons from them. And they're recycling the Israeli military equipment. But that's really not that important. The important thing is that Palestinians have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to have their own forces, their own army that can defend themselves. And by God, they need defending. Look what's happening to them. Even with them trying to, Hamas is not capable of defending itself and of defending 2.5 million Palestinians against the United States and Israel. This war is not being fought by Israel alone. This war is being fought by the United States, Britain, Germany, Italy, and France, and Israel. They're all together. They're all in cahoot in the same genocide that's taken place. This country was based on democracy, justice for all. And these are not simple things. These are heavy obligations that the US is trashing and throwing across the wall. Without the United States, there wouldn't have been a genocide.
Shelly, Faisal brings up a really good point. I think JPP is doing a lot of really interesting and meaningful and important work right now at a time when it's not the easiest. Can you tell me about how that experience has been?
Yeah, it's JPP is an inspirational place to be right now, and a painful place at the same time. When we have especially when we have our cross-country, our national meetings or meetings among chapters, we bring joy and we bring the pain into the meetings at the same time. And to see that happening, I never thought I would be working with a group of people who could inspire me so much, both nationally, some of whom I have never met in person, and also here in New Haven. I call them my compas, my compañeros. they're just wonderful people and doing amazing things in incredibly hard times.
One thing really special about JVP is because they are Jewish, they're in a position to state opinions about Israel and not be classified as anti-Semitic, even though Israel and its supporters still try to brand them as anti-Semitic and being Jewish. It's like it's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
But they are more credible when they are stating opinions than me coming and saying something about Israel.
Right.
They definitely are more credible than I am in the eyes of the media and in the eyes of the American people.
I'm aware of that, Faisal, but we get
You get
we get it.
You get your fair share.
Yeah, but at least, there's a certain number of people who would appreciate what you have to say. And the credibility is a very important factor that you bring to the table.
Thank you.
I think we would be remiss in this conversation if we didn't address what people always say. It's like, well, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They started this on October 7th. We've talked a bit about this, right? It didn't start on October 7th. What is Hamas's current responsibility in this genocide?
Well, I think Hamas did what they did to prevent the Palestinian question from being liquidated. There was a diabolical plan involving the rich Arab countries and Egypt and the US and Israel and Jordan to completely end the Palestinians' hopes of ever receiving justice and maintaining their identity. What was being planned, according to informed sources, was to basically erase Palestine forever. And Hamas had to act to preserve the Palestinian identity and to preserve the rights of Palestinians from being trampled on forever and erased forever. And it was not a simple decision, and it was a very risky decision. They knew that Israel were not a bunch of Boy Scouts, that they were going to turn around and be mad as hornets, because for the first time somebody came and outfoxed them and in a fight and ran their defense lines and doing things. They knew that they were going to be subject to retaliation, but maybe they didn't realize the degree to which that Israel was going to react and go beyond any human considerations and go after civilians and go after the civilian life instead of attacking the military.
I think one thing I want to end with is the question that I've been struggling with a great deal. What does tomorrow look like? So tell me, what's at stake if we continue down this line?
Well, I think in historic Palestine, which would be Israel 48, the West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, I think the same will happen to the West Bank as has happened to Gaza. It may not be exactly identical, but pretty much the same. It's already happening. It's certainly happening in Jenin, which is where the most resistance to the IOF is, but it's also happening in other cities and other areas around the West Bank. And it's being executed by the IOF, the Israeli Offense Force, as well as settlers in the settlements. As I mentioned before, they're being armed by weapons that are manufactured here in Connecticut to kill Palestinians. And so I see that trend continuing in the city of Hebron as well, Al-Khalil in Arabic. And so I think that's going to happen. And I think historically, a lot of the Zionist leaders over the years in the 1930s, 1940s, issued statements that basically said, made statements that basically said, we'll take as much as we can get now. Eventually, we'll get the whole thing. And I think they're going to get the whole thing. And I think it's the only way to stop that is for the United States to stop being complicit and supportive in that. And I don't see that changing at all.
One thing also I want to bring out, it's not just what Shelly said. There's more to it. Israel is not satisfied with just the West Bank and Gaza. Israel is going after Lebanon. They're going to do the same thing in Lebanon, what they did in Gaza. They're on their way in doing that. Every night they kill hundreds of people, destroy huge blocks of buildings. And they're going to go to Syria, and they're going to go to Iraq, and they want to get to Iran. They want to take all that area, and they want to create a genocide across the entire Middle East. And they're going to do the same. They want to do the same to Iran if somebody lets them to do it. So this isn't going to end with just Palestine, historic Palestine. There's more at stake here. There's a lot at stake. And also, it's a precedent that the world cannot afford to allow. Because if Israel can get away with that, just think what's going to happen next. Then everybody else is going to try to do the same thing and get away with it. And where do we stand then at that point? What kind of a world do we want to live in?
What kind of world do we want to live in?
Thank you both so much for being here today. Thank you both to Palestine Museum and JVP New Haven, your courage for being here and having this conversation and the continued work that you do. Thank you again.
Thank
Thank you so much, Faisal.